The hem of Abigail Mitchell's wedding dress snagged on a rusty nail as she fled from the church, tearing a jagged gash through the delicate ivory satin. She didn't notice at first, her heart pounding too hard against her ribs as she ran blindly through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't until she collapsed on a weathered bench behind the general store that she saw the damage a foot-long tear exposing her petticoat and threatening to unravel the entire skirt. It was May 15, 1882, and Abigail Mitchell had just become a runaway bride. "Well now, that's quite the predicament you've got yourself in, miss." Abigail's head snapped up at the deep, unfamiliar voice. Through tear-blurred vision, she made out the silhouette of a tall man against the late afternoon sun. She hurriedly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassment flooding her cheeks. "I don't need your judgment, sir," she replied, trying to gather the torn fabric in her hands to hide the damage. The stranger stepped closer, and Abigail could see him properly now. Broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, he wore a dusty blue shirt and well-worn leather vest. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened with stubble. Not a local, she was certain of that. "No judgment here, madam, just an observation." He removed his hat, revealing tousled dark blonde hair and striking blue eyes that regarded her with unexpected kindness. "Name's Zachary Jones. Most folks call me Zach." Abigail stiffened. "Mr. Jones, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly what?" "Perfectly fine sitting behind a general store with a torn wedding dress and nowhere to go." His words were blunt, but his tone remained gentle. "Pardon my forwardness, but it seems to me you could use a friend right about now." Fresh tears threatened to spill. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're not where you're supposed to be on what should have been the happiest day of your life." He gestured to the tear in her dress. "And I know I can fix that, at least." Abigail blinked in confusion. "Fix my dress," Zach nodded. "Spent 4 years with the cavalry." "Learn to mend your own clothes or ride with your backside exposed to the elements." A slight smile creased the corners of his eyes. "I keep a small sewing kit in my saddlebag. Not fancy, but it'll hold until you can get proper repairs." Before Abigail could respond, a shout echoed from the main street. She came this way. "Check behind the buildings." Panic seized her. Thomas Preston and his groomsmen were searching for her. Her former fiancé would not take kindly to being left at the altar, especially in front of half the territory's most prominent citizens. Zach noted her expression and quickly put his hat back on. "Trouble? You could say that," Abigail whispered. He offered his hand. "My horse is hitched around the corner. I can get you somewhere safe, give you time to think." Abigail hesitated only briefly before taking his calloused palm. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most," he replied simply. 5 minutes later, they were riding away from Copper Creek. Abigail perched awkwardly sideways in front of Zach on his dappled gray gelding. The torn dress made riding difficult, billowing behind them like a damaged sail. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of scrub pine and rocky outcroppings, until they reached a small cabin nestled against a hillside. "My uncle's hunting cabin," Zach explained as he helped her dismount. "He passed last winter. I've been staying here while deciding whether to move on or settle in these parts." The cabin was modest but clean, consisting of a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, and shelves holding basic provisions. Zach busied himself building a small fire to ward off the approaching evening chill while Abigail stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her torn dress. "I should introduce myself properly," she said when he finished with the fire. "I'm Abigail Mitchell." "Abby to my friends, not that I seem to have many left after today," Zach smiled. "Pleased to meet you officially, Miss Mitchell." He rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin. Opening it revealed several needles, a small pair of scissors, and spools of thread in various colors. Now, about that dress. Abigail's cheeks colored. I couldn't possibly. I'll step outside while you get situated, he said, understanding her predicament. There's a blanket you can wrap around yourself, just keep the torn section accessible. When Zach returned, Abigail had arranged herself on a chair with the damaged portion of her dress spread across her lap, the rest of her modestly covered with a wool blanket. He pulled up the other chair and examined the tear with a critical eye. It's a clean rip along the seam, he observed. Should be straightforward enough. He selected a needle and ivory thread that nearly matched the satin. With surprising dexterity, he began to work. So, he said conversationally as he stitched, "You want to tell me why you ran?" Abigail sighed, watching his large hands perform the delicate work. Thomas Preston is the most eligible bachelor in the territory. Cattle baron, owns half the businesses in town, including the bank where my father worked. My father died 3 months ago, heart failure. Zach paused, looking up. I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you. After he died, Thomas started calling more frequently. He'd always shown interest, but I'd kept him at a distance. Then suddenly, I had funeral expenses, a mortgage, my younger sister to care for. She twisted her hands in her lap. Thomas proposed, promising to take care of everything. Said he'd been waiting for the right moment. Understanding dawned in Zach's eyes. And you felt you had no choice. At first, I was grateful. Then last night at the rehearsal dinner, I overheard him talking to his business partners. He was bragging about how acquiring me was his smartest investment yet. Said I'd make the perfect ornamental wife, beautiful, educated, and desperate enough to be properly obedient. Her voice hardened. Then he laughed and said my sister could work as a maid in our home to earn her keep. Zach's jaw tightened as he resumed sewing. Some men don't deserve the air they breathe. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it, just smiled and said I should be flattered he chose me and that a woman in my position couldn't afford pride. Abigail's eyes flashed. So I walked down that aisle today knowing exactly what I was doing. I waited until the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, looked Thomas straight in the eye and objected myself. Then I ran. Zach chuckled. I wish I could have seen his face. A reluctant smile tugged at Abigail's lips. It was rather satisfying. Her smile faded. But now I have nowhere to go. My sister is staying with our aunt in Tucson, but I can't get there without money, which is all tied up in the house Thomas now essentially owns through the bank. They fell silent as Zach continued his careful work. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, the needle flashing in the firelight. What did you do before? For work, I mean. I taught at the schoolhouse. I was good at it too, but they'll never hire me back now, not after I humiliated the most powerful man in the county. Zach tied off the thread and bit it clean. There, not pretty, but it'll hold. He sat back, examining his handiwork. You know, my uncle left me more than just this cabin. He had a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, couple 100 acres, small herd of cattle, decent house. I've been fixing it up, planning to sell it. Abigail looked puzzled. Why are you telling me this? Because it has a spare room that no one's using, and the nearest neighbor is looking for someone to teach his 3 children. Zach shrugged. Might be a temporary solution while you figure things out. Abigail stared at him, her green eyes wide with surprise. You do that for a complete stranger. You're not exactly a stranger anymore. His expression grew serious. Besides, I know what it's like to need a fresh start. What's your story, Mr. Jones? She asked softly. He looked into the fire. Another time, perhaps. Standing, he gathered his sewing supplies. You should get some rest. You take the cot. I'll sleep by the fire. But I've already imposed. It's no imposition. His tone was final. Tomorrow we can ride to the ranch. You'll be safe there until you decide your next move. Abigail studied him in the flickering light. Why do I feel like I can trust you? We've only just met. Zach smiled, the expression transforming his rugged features. Maybe because we both know what it's like to recognize a bad situation and have the courage to walk away from it. As Abigail settled onto the narrow cot that night, still wearing her partially mended wedding dress, she couldn't help but wonder at the strange turn her life had taken. Hours ago, she'd been preparing to resign herself to a loveless marriage of convenience. Now she was in a remote cabin with a mysterious cowboy who sewed better than her mother ever had. Morning brought clarity and the realization that her options were indeed limited. Thomas Preston was not a man who accepted defeat graciously. If she returned to Copper Creek, she would face not only his wrath but the judgment of the entire town. Zach prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, bacon, and johnnycakes while Abigail washed up as best she could with the limited facilities. "About your offer," she said as they ate. "I'll accept, but only temporarily. And I insist on paying rent once I secure employment with your neighbor." Zach nodded. "Fair enough." The ride to the ranch took most of the morning. Abigail's wedding dress, still conspicuously inappropriate for horseback riding despite the repairs, created challenges, but she managed with quiet determination. When they finally crested a ridge, she gasped at the view below. Nestled in a gentle valley, the ranch was larger than Zach had described. A two-story house painted white with green trim stood near a sturdy barn and corral. A creek wound through pastures where a modest herd of cattle grazed. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with spring snow. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed. "Uncle Sam had a good eye for land," Zach agreed. "He homesteaded here 30 years ago, built it all himself." As they approached the house, Abigail noticed fresh lumber on the porch and new glass in several windows. "You've been working on it." "Trying to increase its value before selling," he confirmed, though something in his tone suggested reluctance. The interior of the house was simple but well built, with a spacious kitchen, comfortable sitting room, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Zach showed her to a room at the back of the house, overlooking the mountains. "It's not much," he said, suddenly seeming self-conscious. "It's perfect," she replied honestly. After settling in, Abigail insisted on helping with the ranch chores. Despite her inappropriate attire, she pitched in where she could, revealing a practical capability that surprised and impressed Zach. "You're not what I expected from a schoolteacher," he commented as they fed the horses that evening. "And what did you expect?" she asked, amused. "Someone more." He gestured vaguely. "Delicate, helpless," she laughed. "My father was determined to raise daughters who could fend for themselves. He taught us to ride, shoot, and manage a household, said a woman with skills would never be truly desperate." A shadow crossed her face. "I almost proved him wrong by marrying Thomas." "But you didn't," Zach reminded her. "You chose freedom over security." The next morning, Zach took Abigail to meet Gregory Weber, the neighboring rancher with 3 school-aged children. Weber, a widower struggling to balance ranching with parenthood, was delighted to meet a qualified teacher willing to educate his children. "I can't offer much," he said apologetically. $5 a week and meals while you're here." "That's perfectly acceptable," Abigail assured him. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow too soon?" he asked hopefully. And so Abigail began her new life. During the day, she taught the Weber children John, Mary, and Daniel using textbooks borrowed from their father's modest library. In the evenings, she returned to Zach's ranch, where they shared the work and simple meals together. Gradually, Abigail learned more about the enigmatic cowboy who had come to her rescue. Zachary Jones had indeed served in the cavalry, fighting in the last of the Apache conflicts before becoming disillusioned with military life. He'd wandered the Western Territories for years afterward, working as a ranch hand, occasionally as a guide, living simply and keeping largely to himself. "My uncle was my only real family," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Never knew my father. My mother died when I was 12. Uncle Sam took me in despite having no experience with children, taught me everything I know about ranching, horses, and being a man of my word." "He sounds wonderful," Abigail said softly. Zach nodded. "He was. That's why I feel guilty about selling this place. But I've never stayed anywhere for long, don't know if I'm cut out for setting down roots." What would you do instead? He shrugged. Keep moving, I suppose. There's always work for a man who knows horses and cattle. That sounds lonely, she observed. His blue eyes met hers. It can be. As weeks passed, Abigail's torn wedding dress hung forgotten in the closet of her bedroom, replaced by simple calico dresses purchased with her teaching earnings. She wrote to her sister in Tucson, explaining her situation without revealing her exact location, fearful that Thomas might intercept the mail. Zach continued improvements on the ranch, though with noticeably less enthusiasm for selling it. They fell into a comfortable routine together, their initial awkwardness giving way to easy companionship. They shared the cooking and household tasks without discussion, each naturally complementing the other's skills. The Weber children adored their new teacher, making rapid progress under her guidance. Word spread among the scattered homesteaders in the area, and soon 2 more families arranged for their children to join the impromptu school. By mid-July, when summer heat baked the valley and afternoon thunderstorms rolled across the mountains, Abigail had saved enough to repay Zach for his kindness. "I can find my own place now," she told him over dinner. "Perhaps rent a room in town." Zach looked up sharply. "Is that what you want?" She hesitated. "I don't want to impose any longer. You've been more than generous. It's not an imposition." He set down his fork. "Truth is, I've grown accustomed to having you here." The admission hung in the air between them. Abigail felt her pulse quicken. Over the past weeks, she'd become increasingly aware of her feelings for Zach, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. But she'd buried these thoughts, certain they were one-sided. "I've grown accustomed to being here too," she confessed. Their eyes met across the table, a current of unspoken understanding passing between them. Before either could say more, a commotion outside drew their attention. Horses approached at a gallop. Zach rose quickly, reaching for the rifle kept by the door. "Stay inside," he instructed, his expression grim. Through the window, Abigail watched as 3 riders pulled up in front of the house. Even in the fading light, she recognized the lead rider immediately, Thomas Preston, his round face flushed with exertion and anger. Behind him rode 2 of his ranch hands, men known for their willingness to carry out Preston's less savory orders. Cold fear gripped her heart as Zach stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Evening, gentlemen," he called. "You're a long way from town." Preston dismounted, his expensive boots raising dust. "I'm looking for my fiancé," he announced. "Abigail Mitchell. We have unfinished business." "No one here by that name," Zach replied evenly. Preston's eyes narrowed. "Don't play games, Cowboy. I know she's here." Gregory Weber's ranch hand got loose-lipped at the saloon last night, bragging about the pretty new schoolteacher staying at the old Jones place. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't considered that her presence would become gossip. "The lady isn't interested in seeing you," Zach said, his stance widening slightly. "I suggest you turn around and head back to Copper Creek." Preston laughed, a harsh sound. "The lady, as you call her, owes me considerable money. The house she lived in belongs to my bank. The funeral expenses I covered for her father, the dresses and fripperies I bought her," he sneered. "Not to mention compensation for public humiliation. I owe you nothing." Abigail stepped onto the porch beside Zach, her fear replaced by indignation. "The house was nearly paid for when my father died. You manipulated the bank records, and I never asked for those gifts." Preston's face darkened. "You ungrateful," he stepped forward, only to find Zach's rifle leveled at his chest. "That's close enough," Zach said quietly. One of Preston's men reached for his pistol, but Preston raised a hand to stop him. Now, no need for violence." His tone turned silky. "Abigail, be reasonable. You have no future here. Come back with me and all will be forgiven. We can still be married." "I would rather die," she replied flatly. Preston's facade of civility cracked. "Then perhaps you will. There are accidents in these remote parts. Houses catch fire. People disappear." His gaze flicked to Zach. "Sometimes entire families." Zach's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. Is that a threat, Preston? A reality. Preston smiled thinly. I own the cattle market in this territory. One word from me and no one will buy this ranch's beef. One more word and no supplier will sell to you. You'll be ruined within a month. I don't respond well to threats, Zach said, his voice dangerously calm. Preston shrugged. It's simple business. Hand over the woman who legally belongs to me and you can continue your miserable existence undisturbed. I belong to no one, Abigail snapped. The law says otherwise, my dear. A woman can't own property without a husband or father. Your debts to me are legally binding. The sheriff will side with me. Preston's smile widened. Face it, Abigail, you have no choice. A long silence stretched between them. Abigail felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she'd built over the past 2 months suddenly seemed fragile, temporary. Then Zach spoke, his voice steady. She has a choice. She can marry me. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in shock. What did you say? Preston sputtered. Zach didn't look at Abigail, keeping his gaze and rifle trained on Preston. As her husband, I'd assume any debts. I'd also have legal standing to tell you to get off my property. Preston's face contorted. You can't be serious. She's a lady of breeding and education. You're nothing but a drifter playing at ranching. Zach, Abigail whispered, her heart thundering in her chest. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he replied, finally meeting her gaze. In his blue eyes she saw not sacrifice but certainty. Not just for this moment, but because I've been looking for a reason not to sell this ranch. A reason to stay. His voice softened. You're that reason, Abby. The use of her familiar name, spoken with such tenderness, brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't how she'd imagined a proposal, but somehow it felt perfectly right. This is absurd, Preston interrupted. Abigail, you can't possibly. Yes, she said firmly, her eyes never leaving Zach's. Yes, I will marry you. Preston's face purpled with rage. You'll regret this, he spat. Both of you. He turned and mounted his horse roughly. This isn't over. With a jerk of his head to his men, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, trailing dust and threats. When they were gone, silence fell. Abigail and Zach stood on the porch, the rifle now lowered, the enormity of what had just transpired settling between them. Did you mean it? She asked finally. Or was it just to make him leave? Zach set the rifle against the wall and took her hands in his. I meant every word, he said. Though I'd planned a more romantic proposal, maybe after another month or 2. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unexpected. You've been planning to propose, he looked sheepish. Since about the 3rd day you were here, but I wanted to give you time. To be sure you weren't just grateful to be rescued. Abigail laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. I am grateful, but that's not why I said yes. She squeezed his hands. I said yes because in 2 months you've shown me more respect and kindness than Thomas did in 2 years. Because you sew wedding dresses and cook breakfast and teach children to gentle horses. Because when I'm with you, I feel both safe and free at the same time. Zach pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. I love you, Abigail Mitchell. Have since you sat behind that general store, defiant even with tears on your face and your dress in tatters. She raised her face to his. And I love you, Zachary Jones. Have since you offered help without expecting anything in return. Their first kiss was sweet and unhurried, a promise sealed in the golden light of sunset on a porch they now both called home. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher, a ceremony attended by the Weber family and neighboring ranchers. Abigail wore a simple blue dress, not the mended wedding gown that held too many painful memories. Gregory Weber's daughter Mary served as her bridesmaid, proudly bearing flowers gathered from the meadow. Thomas Preston made good on some of his threats. The nearest cattle buyer refused their business, forcing Zach to drive their small herd to a more distant market. Supplies became harder to obtain, requiring trips to towns further away. But they adapted, finding allies among other small ranchers who also resented Preston's iron grip on the local economy. Abigail's school grew, eventually occupying the ranch's refurbished bunkhouse. By Christmas, she was teaching 12 children from surrounding homesteads, earning enough to ease the financial strain caused by Preston's vendetta. Their first year of marriage brought challenges: a harsh winter, illness among the cattle, Preston's continued attempts to undermine them. But it also brought deep joy. They worked side by side, building something neither had expected: to find a partnership based on mutual respect and growing love. By their first anniversary, Abigail was expecting their first child. The evening of the day they received this news, she found Zach sitting on the porch, holding something in his hands. "What's that?" she asked, settling beside him. He held it up: her torn wedding dress, carefully folded. "Found it when I was clearing space in the closet for the cradle I'm building." Abigail took it, running her fingers over the ivory satin, finding the nearly invisible seam where Zach had mended it. "It seems like another lifetime ago." In a way, it was. He placed his hand over hers. "I was thinking we might use some of the fabric for our baby's christening gown. Transform something meant for an unhappy beginning into a celebration of new life." Tears filled her eyes. "That's perfect," she whispered. As twilight deepened around them, Abigail leaned against her husband's solid strength. The dress that had once represented confinement, now a symbol of how unexpected turns, even tears, could lead to the life you were meant to find. On the day their daughter Elizabeth was born in the spring of 1884, she was wrapped in a christening gown sewn from ivory satin, with a tiny repair still visible if you knew where to look. To most, it was merely a beautiful garment. To Abigail and Zach, it was a reminder that sometimes life's most treasured journeys begin with a single torn seam and the hands willing to mend it. Years later, when Abigail's sister asked how she and Zach had fallen in love, Abigail would smile and say simply, "He sewed my torn dress and mended my broken heart. And in return, I gave him roots when all he'd known was wandering." By then, their ranch had prospered despite Thomas Preston's early obstacles. The cattle business expanded. Abigail's school became officially recognized by the Territorial Board of Education, and their family grew to include 3 children who ran wild and free across the land their parents had fought to keep. Preston eventually overextended himself financially and lost much of his empire to Eastern investors. He left the territory in disgrace, moving to California where, it was rumored, he married and divorced in quick succession. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zach presented Abigail with a special gift: the tin sewing kit he'd used to mend her dress, now inlaid with silver and containing new needles and colorful threads. "For whatever else needs mending," he said with a smile that still made her heart flutter. Abigail kissed him under the same porch where they had once faced down threats together. "Some things," she whispered against his lips, "never need mending at all.